Hi, welcome to Finding Fuscata. I'm Sean. I had an interesting conversation with somebody in one of the forums that I'm in, and this person was struggling with something that Neil Donald Walsh had talked about, with the idea that certain, let's say, individuals from the not too distant history who committed horrifying crimes against humanity may not be burning in hell right now and could have gone on to heaven. What a crazy idea. And this person was just kind of like horrified by this idea and didn't really know how to resolve it. And I tried writing out words and I tried typing up stuff, but for me, I'm kind of an external processor. And the more I thought about it and tried to write about it, the more I realized I just wanted to talk about it because that's easier for me. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, I haven't posted a video in a while, and so this may not be the best place to restart my YouTube channel, YouTube career, but hey, it is what it is, right? One of the lessons I've been learning lately in my life is to just lean into who you are and to speak the truth as you see it and let the chips fall where they may. So here we go. When I first came across this idea back when I was, well, let me back up a little bit more. So I came from a fundamentalist Christian background, and in that world, there's a concept that if you have not placed your faith in Jesus Christ and confessed your sins and confessed that Jesus is Lord, then you cannot go to heaven. And in this world, there's a debate that goes on sometimes that Jeffrey Dahmer, who confessed Christ as Lord on his deathbed, went on to heaven, and yet Mother Teresa, who committed her entire life to helping the poor, did not go to heaven because she's Catholic. And clearly Catholics aren't going to heaven because they aren't Protestant, right? And in that world, that's kind of how they think of things. That's how things get framed. And I used to think that. I used to really believe that. And I would make arguments, along those lines and say, well, this is what the Bible says. And so, this is how the world is. Thankfully, I don't see the world that way anymore. But once you open up that idea, then there are other ideas that can come along. And this one, like many ideas, if it's not explained properly, if it's not understood properly, then it can be very dangerous. And this is where the concept that, it's paraphrased, but Carl Jung would say that people don't have ideas as much as ideas have people. And this is why, in my estimation, people like Jordan Peterson, for example, and people that are kind of in his ilk, people that are in his domain, are doing the work that they're doing, is because there are ideas in the world that can have people, and it's important that people who are had by these ideas, who are taken by these ideas, have the intellectual capabilities and the reasoning capabilities to be able to see these ideas and let them go or embody them or apply them or whatever it is, but to do so judiciously and with wisdom. And this idea that certain characters within history have gone on to heaven and are not in fact burning in hell is a legitimate idea. And it's actually, from one perspective, a good idea. In fact, it's probably a true idea if you believe in heaven and hell or any kind of afterlife or anything like that. So let me unpack a couple different things so we can look at this in a different way. So when Neil Donald Walsh I don't know. Well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, obviously, but the way that I understood what he meant is that from a certain perspective, if you're able to look back at something, if you're able to step back far enough from something and look at it broadly, you can see in the overall arc of human history how that there's that phrase from the Bible. I can't remember the verse, but it says that God means all things for good. Like all things work for good to those who love God. And I know there are people in the Christian community who are going to quibble over that and say that I'm taking it out of context, and I am a little bit, but that also ties into the idea that if you are in the New Age community, the New Thought community, the manifesting community, however it is, then we have this idea that anything that happens to me is either a blessing or a blessing in disguise. Well, how do you square that idea if you're going through the Holocaust? How do you square that idea if you're living in a Soviet concentration camp? You know, if you're in the Gulag archipelago, how is that a good thing, right? If you're suffering through some torment in your life, how can this be good? How can the person who's inflicting this torment on me not be destined for hell for eternity? How does that work? And it can be a difficult one to understand, but the way that I see this is that if you look at the overall scale of things, right, and you look at the horrors that were carried out in Europe leading up to the Second World War by certain groups against other certain groups, there's an argument to be made that the people who survived those concentration camps in Europe, many of them moved to the United States. And many of those people made their way to places like Hollywood. And many of those people had descendants. And those descendants became very successful in places like Hollywood. And then those descendants had cousins and they had families and they learned these stories. And they made amazing things because of what had happened in the past, right? So you could say like a movie like Schindler's List it's a tremendous movie. It's a masterpiece of cinema. And it was told from that perspective by someone who had the perspective of the Jews like ingrained within them. And you can tell that there was that feeling, that emotion it was raw, it was visceral, and it was real. And it was painful to watch because it was a horrifying period of human history. But what comes from that? What comes from that is people later on down the road who see that and realize the darkness and depravity that humans are capable of. People see the value in self-sacrifice. People see the value in putting your neck out to save those who are helpless. People see that movie and maybe they're inspired to start a business to help people who are legitimately oppressed and to rescue lives, right? So, and that's just one movie, and then you have like the whole Star Wars movies, or all the things that Spielberg has done, or the way that Hollywood has been able to expand because of some of these great stories that were told, and the inspirational things that have happened because of these arts and because of these great things that have happened. How would any of those amazing things have happened if it hadn't been for the horrible tragedy that happened in Europe in the 30s and 40s? Would we have one without the other? Would we have the benefit without the loss? Do you see what I mean? And similarly, if you look at the things that happened in the Soviet Union, with the Gulag Archipelago, and how many tens of millions of people are Lenin and Stalin, how many tens of millions of deaths are Lenin and Stalin responsible for? We don't even know. And how many hundreds of millions of deaths are they responsible for through their ideas being carried out? I mean, look at the horrors that happened in China, when communism started to take over. So there's a part of us that when we're in our ego self that wants to look at those individuals and say, Stalin, Lenin, Chairman Mao, Adolf, and see these people and say, yeah, they did horrible things. I hope they're burning in hell right now. Right? But look at the good things that have come. And it reminds me of that parable, the Buddhist parable of the farmer and his son and the horses. You know that one? Just a thumbnail of it is that there's a farmer who had a horse and a son, and they were very, very poor, and the only thing they had was this horse, and the horse ran away, and the villagers all came and said, "Oh, it's so terrible your horse ran away. How will you survive?" And the farmer said, "Who can tell what's good or what's bad?" Well, a couple days later, and I may be butchering this, but you get the idea. A couple days later, the horse came back, and with it, there was a whole herd of horses. And they're beautiful horses. And all the village people came and said, "Oh, this is amazing. You have all these horses now. You're wealthy. Aren't you so happy?" And the farmer said, "Who can tell what's good or what's bad?" And later, the farmer's son was breaking in one of these horses and fell and broke his leg. And the villagers all said, "Oh, that's so terrible. Your son broke his leg. What are we going to do? Oh, it's terrible." And the farmer said, say it with me, "Who can tell what's good or what's bad?" Well, the next day, somebody came to conscript young men into the military because the country was under attack. And they took all the able-bodied young men. And his son had a broken leg, so he couldn't go. And everybody said, "Isn't this great? Your son couldn't go. He couldn't get conscripted into the army, so he's going to survive." And what did the farmer say? "Who can tell what's good or what's bad?" So you can see all these different events came from that. And when we're in our ego selves, we see this immediate thing. We see this tangible thing that's in front of us, and we assume, oh, this is a good thing, or oh, that's a bad thing, right? But when we step back far enough, you can see that it's just an event. So this is something I talk about in my coaching program. It's a principle that I learned from studying Course in Miracles, is that everything that happens in our lives is assigned a meaning. Like this book, for example, The Kabbalion. I've studied this book. I've had many copies that were highlighted and dog-eared, and I apply these principles, and this book means something to me. This microphone means something to me. This table means something to me. But these things all mean different things to me than they do to you. They may mean nothing to you, right? But the thing is that anything that happens in our life that we assign meaning to it, that's the key idea, is that we assign the meaning to it. This book means nothing in and of itself. The Bible means nothing in and of itself. It's a cover with pages in it and words in ink. It's just the thing. It's the ideas and the concepts. But even the ideas and the concepts, we assign a meaning and we assign a value to it, right? And the key in life that I've found, the key if you're moving towards enlightenment, or if you want to move forward in your spiritual journey, or if you want to have a different understanding, or if you feel yourself bound up by anxieties and bound up by judgments and just bound up by just the angst of life and feeling powerless all the time. Because believe me, I feel that almost daily. What I find is that when you can step back for a moment and see it for what it is, and see that the meaning that you've assigned to it is just the meaning that you've assigned to it. Then you can take the judgment away. And suddenly you can see that the things that happen in Europe, the things that happen in Russia, the things that led to the movies in Hollywood, and now the scandals that come out of Hollywood, and, whatever's going to unfold in the future. You can be like the farmer and say, who can tell what's good and what's bad? And when you can move far enough back into that perspective, you come across something that Dr. David Hawkins talks about in some of his books. This one is called Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. And I think in one of the books, I think it's Gloria in Excelsis Deo, he talks about how within divine consciousness, there's no judgment. There's only love, because it can see things from such a broad perspective. It can see the good that comes, right? But from our ego side, we think that there has to be some kind of accountability. And some would argue that, and I tend to believe this, I think there's enough evidence going for it, that some believe that, when we leave this plane of existence, we go to a place where there's a life review. And there have been countless people who have come back from what we call near-death experiences and have said that when they went through their life review, they had to feel within themselves all the feelings that they caused other people to feel, right? And the idea being that there is a kind of judgment, but it's not a judgment of hellfire and damnation. It's a judgment of, this is what you made other people feel. How do you like it? Right? Now, here's another perspective that's going to be uncomfortable. In the Christian community, we used to talk a lot about the sin of commission and the sin of omission. So in other words, the sin of commission means you committed a sin, like you committed adultery, you robbed, you stole, you lied, you whatever the thing was, you committed the sin, right? But then the sin of omission is you didn't do a thing. You didn't prevent somebody from lying. You didn't prevent a law from being passed that led to atrocities. You didn't, like Jordan Peterson talks about, totalitarian governments and fascism takes place when people stop telling the truth. And they all just completely lie to each other all the time about everything. And that's a sin of omission. You're lying, you're committing a sin of commission because you're lying, but then you're also committing a sin of omission because you're not telling the truth. You see what I mean? And both of them can lead to hellscapes here on earth. So one of the arguments I tried to pose in this forum is that from our vantage point, it's easier for us to look back in history and see these certain people who committed these atrocities and say, oh, those people are bad, they deserve to burn in hell, right? But then, because they had the sin of commission. But if you have a sin of omission and you don't advocate for recycling in your community, if you don't, if you don't stand up for laws that you believe in, if you don't stand up for, people who are being silenced and legitimately oppressed, if you do nothing, you just walk by and you just live your regular life, right? You may not have the knife in your hand. You may not pull the trigger. But if you're not doing anything, how many people down the road are going to have negative consequences because you didn't have the courage to speak the truth? How many people are going to suffer consequences because you were not convinced enough to live out your convictions, and we're not wise enough to think these things through and to apply them with reason and logic, right? How many people are, like in my own life, how many people suffer because I've been hiding in my shell for all of these years. I've been hiding from my calling for all of these years. How many people suffered because I locked my lips? Hundreds, thousands, millions? I don't know. I don't know how many people I could have affected if I had done what I'd known I should be doing from the time I was a teenager. I hid from it. I lied to myself. That's a sin of omission, you see? And in the greater scheme of things, how am I any different than Stalin? Stalin did things, changed the world, made things worse, created hellscapes. I kept my mouth shut, changed the world, created hellscapes. Do you see? And so, but our ego wants to protect us from that. Our ego wants to say, yeah, but you were like this, and the world and the economy and the blah, 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 blah. And like, it's all BS that we fill ourselves with. And because, like I said a moment ago, all those thoughts, we assign meaning to those things, right? And when these ideas come up and we want to defend ourselves, we want to defend our actions, it's just the ego saying, well, you did it because like this was happening and you had to, and you know, you were scared and that's okay. And you know, it's fine. And you got to be understanding, right? But the reality is that people suffered. That's reality. You can't deny that. The reality is that I didn't speak my truth. I didn't follow my calling, right? And so when you expand out far enough, who is more guilty of hellfire and damnation? You, who committed a lifetime of sins of omission, or the guy who must not be named, who committed the sin of commission? I don't know. But the answer is, when you go back to a far enough perspective, and this is the idea that I think Neil Donald Walsh was trying to get across, is that it all leads to good. It all leads back around to evil. It all leads back around to good. Because like it says in the Kabbalion, you know, life is about rhythm. It's all about cycles. It's all about, you know, rising and falling, right? You have to breathe out so you can breathe in. You know, you have to have a hot day so you can appreciate a cold day. You have to be hungry so you can appreciate being full, right? You have to have, and this is a hard thing to accept, you have to have a great evil so that you can appreciate great good. You see? Now, here's where this becomes problematic. And here is where I believe some of the work that Jordan Peterson and folks in his realm, this is the work that they're doing and why it's so incredibly important, is that we tend to live, we live in a dualistic world, right? So we think in terms of up and down, left and right, black and white, him and her, this and that. Because that's how we've either been trained to think, or that's kind of how the world is, right? But from another perspective, everything is non-dualistic at the same time. This is something we learn in the Kabbalion, where it talks about everything has its polarities. This is the thing that people in the some of the transgender community, or people who support transgender movements, say that, you know, gender is on a spectrum. And in a sense, you know, if you look at everything like on a bell curve, yeah, you'll have like a lot of masculine and a lot of feminine, and in the middle, you have to, by definition, just have like, you know, people spotted out throughout the middle. I mean, that's what they're talking about, right? The problem comes in is when you can, and this is cliche, but this is how I understand this right now, is that you can be so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? And this is where we need to, as a society, find the balance between liberalism and conservatism. Because we have to be able to say, to the people on the liberal side, okay, how are we going to push the boundaries? What is the new thing that we're not thinking about? How are we being oppressive of this group and we're not seeing it? Or how are we doing business that's harming people but we don't know how to change it yet? Like, how do we do that, right? But then the conservative role is to say, we know this works, and we're going to stick to this until you prove that your new idea works. And then once you prove that new idea works, then we'll make an adjustment. And then you prove the next idea works, then we'll make an adjustment. And then you make an adjustment and make an adjustment. And that's why it's so important to have like the liberal and the conservative camps. Not political parties, that's a different discussion, but the liberal and conservative ideas, within a society, so that you can keep moving society together without it falling apart. Now, the risk that I see in this idea, and the reason why it's hard to hold on to this idea that somebody like he who must not be named for the, YouTube algorithm, the idea that someone like that could be in heaven, the reason that idea becomes dangerous is because people can then start to say, oh, well, then nothing matters, right? Oh, well, then everything is arbitrary. Oh, well, then there is no morality. Oh, well, then, it's like Nietzsche said, God is dead. So that's it. Let's just do whatever the hell we want, right? But where that fails is that it doesn't preserve society. And that is the duty that we have as people who are here now, people who are coming up, people in my generation and future generation or generations ahead of me and generations that are coming up, is we need to look at society. We need to look at how quickly hellscapes can develop. We need to look at how things need to be locked in place in order that future generations who are coming up will have a society that functions. And ever since I remember my dad talking about this in the late 70s or, throughout the 80s, where he would say, people are so concerned about their rights, but nobody cares about their responsibilities. And within a society, we have responsibilities. I have responsibilities as a father. Do I always do them perfectly? Hell no. I have responsibilities as a husband. Again, I'm not perfect, but I recognize them as my responsibilities. I have responsibilities as a homeowner. I have responsibilities as a citizen. I have responsibilities as a veteran. I have responsibilities because of my privilege in life. I have responsibilities that I need to take care of. I have duties. I have obligations that I have to meet. Right? I also have rights, sure. But my care needs to be about my responsibilities and less so about my rights. And then here's where some of the cognitive dissonance comes in, is that when this idea that he who must not be named could be in heaven comes about, people will fear that all of society will disintegrate into chaos, right? But the trick is that we have to be able to see that, right, from our perspective, to see this box of values that have been created by a certain aspect of people, by ego, by values, by all this other kind of stuff. And we look at that, right, and we say, okay, this is a real thing that exists within the world. And if we allow this to happen, then this can create a hellscape, and this can create genocide, and this can create all kinds of horrors, right? But eventually it'll lead to good. So do we just let it happen? Well, the answer is no. You don't just let it happen, but you also don't condemn when it does happen, right? So we see this playing out in the Middle East right now, throughout the nation of Israel, where, both sides have committed atrocities. And it's hard, especially for me as a Westerner and with a Christian background, to look at both sides and say, oof, one's right and one's wrong. I have an idea, and I have my tendencies that I lean toward, but at the end of the day, it's not, you can't say that like one side is more responsible than the other, because they're both committing the atrocities, right? But the question that we need to be asking ourselves is not who's committing the atrocities, who is deserving of eternal damnation, who's offending who's God, who's killing whom, right? All those things will have to be sorted out at some point in time. But the bigger question that we need to be asking is, okay, this event is happening. This is a real thing that's happening. Real people are really suffering, and it's horrifying. How do we, as a society, find a way to prevent this? How do we, as a society, help the individuals who are locked in this world, who are locked in those worldviews? How do we help them find freedom from those ideas, right? How do we help them elevate their consciousness so that they can walk away from those fights, so that they can grow and learn and become? Like how do we do that? How do we better set up laws, within our nation, so that we will preserve the societies that we've created, and we can see how delicate they are. Civilizations are very, very delicate. And if you don't approach them with wisdom and with care and with seriousness, everything crumbles. Everything falls apart. Okay, so here's the crux of it all, is that it's true, I believe, that from a certain perspective, he who must not be named, to please the algorithm gods, could possibly be in what we call heaven, and could have gone on through the pearly gates as we conceptualize them, and is living, I won't say living happily ever after, but is not experiencing eternal hellfire and damnation. But that doesn't mean that everything here on earth in our current time is arbitrary and meaningless. It also doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to have preventative measures. It also doesn't mean that we have the ability to be so open-minded that our brain falls out. And the reality is that for me at least, when I think about those things, when I think about the atrocities of the past and the atrocities of the present, I see the value and the long-term ramifications of me taking radical responsibility for my own life and encouraging others to do the same. I see that my Air Force core values of integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do don't just apply to my Air Force career, they apply to the rest of my life. Right? Because after all, what's integrity? Integrity, if you think about it from like an engineering perspective, it means if something has good integrity, it's bound together, it's held together. So we think of integrity being, you tell the truth and, you're good character and all this other kind of stuff. But it's more than that. It's you are held together and in yourself, and you have good order and discipline in your own life, and you maintain your finances, and you maintain your family, and you maintain your civic duties and responsibilities, right? But then you also integrate into the rest of the team. You integrate into the rest of the community. That's what integrity is. You live a life of integrity. It means you are integrated as a beneficial member of a greater whole. So in the Air Force, integrity first means that you are integrated into the Air Force as a beneficial member of a larger whole that is carrying out a mission, right? And then service before self, because in order to do that, you have to be able to take the things, your own desires, not family and religion and those sorts of things. Those are a different kind of thing, but like service before self has to be, I'm going to be an integral part of this unit before I worry about getting my degree, before I worry about, at least in the Air Force mentality, before I worry about self-aggrandizement, before I worry about any of those sorts of things, before I worry about partying, before I go worry about chasing tail, before I think about any of those things, my first priority is to be to have integrity and be an integral part of this unit. And to translate that then into our society, and to translate that into how we then prevent the coming storm, or at least prepare for the coming storm, is that we live with integrity within our community, within your town, within your church, within your workplace, within your organization, your fraternity or your sorority or whatever thing it is, right? You be a firm, steady, integral part of that organization, of that, whatever that entity is, whether it's, can be just your family. And that is how we then are able to take these larger ideas of absolute forgiveness, of absolute, seeing that the ebb and flow of history and that it moves back and forth, right? It happens. But then if we are integral, if we're well integrated, then as history ebbs and flows, we can view it and say, these things are going to be a blessing and a curse, and it's fine, because our society, our culture, our personhood, our family, our ethnicity, our whatever the thing is that you in this moment find of value is well integrated. And I with integrity am an integral part of that, right? And this is why, Jordan Peterson went through and did things about maps of meaning, why he's always talking about, archetypes and story arcs. And there's all these things people trying to find meaning, because people have lost the reason why we need to be well integrated. And it's also the reason why our enemies have sought to weaken that integration. It's why we all have smartphones and we stare at them all day and nobody goes to the Lions Club anymore. It's why Masonic lodges all across the country are closing down. It's why churches are being mothballed, because our enemy has attacked us. And whether you think that enemy is Satan or ego or capitalism or communism or whatever, it doesn't matter. The fact is that our enemy has attacked us at our integrity. And when we've become unintegrated, that's when we're vulnerable, right? So I know that this idea seems to have wandered way off topic from the original, but this is why this idea is so dangerous, and why this idea is also so beneficial, right? And this is why we need to be expanding our horizons. We need to be learning. We need to take all the things that I've just said and research them and Google them and rebut them and refute them and, chase them down and find the truth. But the thing you will not be able to refute in anything that I've just said is that if you want to have a strong community, if you want to survive and thrive in the coming storms, you're going to have to live with integrity in your community, because you can't rely on anybody to just by just assume that certain things are bad and certain things are good. It's not going to happen. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. Like the mist. It's gone. Right? We've moved into a new way of humanity. And unless we want to fall back into an old way of thinking, then we need to keep moving forward. It's like, we dropped that. We killed God. We got blood on our hands. Tracking. Thanks, Nietzsche, for pointing that out to us. But that's done. That sin of commission is done. Right? And now we're looking in the future. We can't commit a sin of omission by not being integrated, by not saying, okay, maybe humanism is a good thing. Maybe secularism is a good thing. Maybe we need to take some of the things that were good from, Christianity and some of the things the Mormons do and some of the things the Muslims do and look at all those sorts of things and say, how do we then, as communities, as countries, as cities and towns and workplaces and families, how do we integrate? How do we live with integrity so that we together can avoid the coming storm? Anyway, those are my thoughts. Love to see your comments. And listen, before I go, I want to let you know that I have started a community. There's a Finding Fuscata community. There's a link down in the description. And that community is designed for and by people who are spiritual seekers, who are pushing their boundaries, who want to learn more about how the world works, how to see things differently, who, they've like for me, I've been through so many coaching programs and some of them were fantastic and some of them were just not great. But I have been studying philosophy and religion and the law of attraction and metaphysics and theology and all that kind of stuff for decades. And what I've done is I've taken all that knowledge and kind of boiled it down into a program. It's a 6-month program that you can go through, and it's available on the community link down below, where you learn the basic steps of how to reintegrate your life, of how to find your core limiting beliefs, of how to manifest things, of how to think about, and all these kinds of things. And there's a great community there that's growing. So if you're interested, go and check it out. Follow the link. And I'm in there in the discussion group frequently. And as you're going through the lessons too in there, you can discuss them with other people. Anyway, it's cool in a nerdy kind of way. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check it out. So that's all. Thank you very much for your time, and namaste.